Well, it's come down to this, has it? FreeNAS versus the Drobo, which, in my opinion, I think the Drobo is the best contender to the FreeNAS project. It's going to be a battle royale between FreeNAS, the open source project that lets you set up a home or business network storage for basically on the cheap as far as the operating system cost goes, versus the Drobo, a commercial solution that has a hardware cost overhead, but has a lot of really great features built in. Which one makes the best storage solution? Well, that's what we're going to find out in this episode of an in-depth look. Now at the top here, I have to say, if you haven't yet seen the full FreeNAS review and the full Drobo review, they're both in-depth and they talk a lot about the specific features of each product. So if you're curious about either one, you probably want to start there. I realize that means extra time you have to spend on it, but if you're really serious about this, that's where you've got to start, because those episodes are all about just that product. This episode's more extracted, though I do have updates to the Drobo review since that was filmed earlier in the year. Which is also another disclaimer I should make. I've owned the Drobo for quite a while now, and I've used it at different clients on their network, so I've got a lot of experience with the Drobo, where I don't have as much yet with the FreeNAS, but I'm getting there. Alright, so that's kind of the thing I wanted to say at the top. Now let's get into it. So, the Drobo. Since I've last talked about the Drobo, there's been some huge changes that Data Robotics, the maker of the Drobo, have made. One of which is they now allow third-party applications to run on the Drobo and Drobo Share through an SDK. Now, the Drobo Share, like I mentioned in the review that I did on the Drobo, runs on Linux. That means if you get the right apps installed, you can actually SSH into it, you can load a bash shell, and you can be editing standard Linux comp files. So it is a small embedded Linux box. That's actually extremely powerful. The new Drobo Apps, which you can find at, I believe, drobo.com/Drobo Apps, I'll put a link to it in the notes for the show. These are really actually amazing. They range from Firefly, which is an iTunes server, also an awesome name, that lets you stream music that's on your Drobo throughout all of your home computers that support the DAAP protocol. That's the protocol that iTunes uses to stream music. Rhythmbox, Banshee, Amarok, I think Winamp also supports that. Almost all large media playing applications are starting to support it, I think with the exception of Windows Media Player. So that's really great. Then the other things they've added is there's a community they've built up now where they can submit applications. So even though they're not officially released yet, and these apps so far have all been free, even though they're not officially released yet, you can still download them when they're kind of in the trial phase. Installation couldn't be easier either. You simply drag a tar.gz compressed file into a share on the Drobo, and then when you reboot the Drobo, it'll automatically install that application. Or if you want to make your life even easier, one of the applications you can load is a Drobo Applications Manager, and this thing is sweet. It lets you install applications over the net, so you don't even have to download them. It goes out, gets a directory listing of all of the current applications, gives you their name, and a brief description of what those applications do. You click a link, it installs it immediately, and it's active. No reboot necessary or anything like that. Incredibly easy to use. I love it. I love it. I mean, this took the Drobo for me from a nice storage solution to a very high-end, lots of flexibility. For example, I was having an issue with my machines on my network resolving each other's Windows file share name, the SMB name, using the NetBIOS name protocol. Before, I didn't really have what's called a master browser on my network to retain the list of all the NetBIOS names, and so no one computer held that list and the other computers couldn't retrieve it. I simply now, again, this probably isn't supported, but it's in there to do. I simply loaded the package to enable SSH to my Drobo share. I logged in, I changed the conf configuration in Samba, reloaded Samba, and now I had a master browser on my network. Bob's your uncle, all my machines are resolving each other's names. Fixed my problems. I love it. I love it because the Drobo share itself sips at the power, tiny bit of power. So you can sit there and run a Linux box off of less than a light bulb. I forgot the exact wattage, but I was blown away when I saw how little power the actual Drobo share itself needs. Now the Drobo share is what makes a Drobo networkable. It comes at a cost though. The cost of the Drobo is not for the faint of heart. It is not a cheap piece of equipment, and in my opinion, this is probably one of the biggest drawbacks of the Drobo. Alright, So stay with me on this because it gets a little confusing. They have two models of a Drobo. They have the Drobo, which is only USB 2.0. That's the later generation. And then they have a newer one, the Drobo that's USB 2.0 and has FireWire 800. Now this is really kind of the one everybody's going to want, because the Drobo with FireWire 800 also has significantly increased USB 2.0 speed. We're talking like 50% faster. Then of course the speed of FireWire 800 blows away USB 2.0. So it's definitely the unit you want to look at. But if you want to go cheaper, there still is the older model. Let's talk about prices. Prices for the regular model, the one that has, or the most current model, the FireWire 800, they range between $420 to $500 if you buy it straight from Drobo, and I'm talking with no hard drives. Let me say this again. $420 all the way to $500 depending on where you buy it. Now, if you buy it at JupiterBroadcasting.com/store, we have a discount in there and it's currently shipping for $370. That's a pretty crazy deal, but I don't know how long it's going to last because it's through an association with Amazon. You can get the regular Drobo, the standard one with USB 2.0 only, the older generation. You can pick that up for around $200 depending on where you buy it at. If you buy it directly from Drobo, it costs a little more. Now on top of that, you're still going to need to pick up the Drobo Share if you want to make this thing directly network attachable. The Drobo Share, depending on where you buy it again, can be up to $200, can be as cheap as $150. So best case scenario, you could buy just the 2.0, USB 2.0 older version of the Drobo for probably around $300, and then you could pick up a Drobo Share for around $200. So you're going to be looking at $500–600 just to have a base network attachable Drobo with no drives. If you want to get the FireWire 800 model, then you've got to spend between $420, or if you buy it from our store, $370, plus an additional $200 just for the Drobo Share. Whoa, okay, did I just screw everybody up there? It's a lot of numbers I know I'm throwing at you, but basically a base FireWire 800 model is going to be between $420 to $500 if you buy it direct, $370 if you buy it from JupiterBroadcasting.com/store, just for the FireWire 800 model. That's crazy expensive right there, followed by the Drobo Share, which is another $200. So you can see how you're going to be looking at around $400, $570 just to be able to do the FireWire 800 with a direct network attachable Drobo Share to get it directly on the network. But maybe there's some other options to look at. We'll talk about those later at the show. But now, later at the end of the show, we'll talk about some of the other options, how you can maybe hook up a Drobo through a FreeNAS. But let's talk about some of the advantages of a Drobo and why the price is actually so high. Okay, so we're back out here in my server room, aka the garage, so I could talk about some of the specifically unique features of a Drobo. First of all, it's very aesthetically pleasing. It's a good looking piece of gear. It sits right on top of the Drobo Share if you happen to get that, and it looks really good. It has a minimalistic, almost I'd say kind of an Apple inspired design, but they don't cut out the functionality that sometimes people will to go for the good design. Meaning, it still has a lot of really great practical features. In the back it has all of the hookups, but it still looks very good. And would be something I would be happy to have on my desk if I had all of my gear in there, because it looks really nice. Now I should mention this is the older USB 2.0 model. It is not the FireWire 800 model. So anytime I talk about speed and things like that, that needs to be taken into consideration because the FireWire 800 model is a lot faster. Alright, most of you, if you watched our Drobo review, you know that the nice thing about the Drobo is these drives are truly hot swappable. I can pop any one out at any particular time, slide in a new drive, it rebuilds on the fly, and you're good to go. The Drobo is still accessible while that's happening. Also, the Drobo can do mismatched drives. Top drive here is a 1.5 terabyte drive. The rest, the other three, are only 1 terabyte, only. So the mismatch aspect is extremely nice. When I'm ready to move up to the next level, I'll pop the second drive out, and I'll put in a 1.5 terabyte, and the Drobo will automatically expand. Eventually, the idea is each Drobo is theoretically designed to go up to 16 terabytes in size. So if you are a type of person, maybe you're doing video podcasts or audio shows, and you're always increasing your storage. These HD videos are huge. This is a huge video right here. I have to store that because obviously I want to keep the originals so that I can reprint them at some point in time or something like that. I need something that can grow with me as I do that. The Drobo lets me do that. I can get in at the ground level. I only have to put a 500 gigabyte drive in if I want to, and then I can add storage as I want. Or if I pull a drive out of a computer, I pop it in the Drobo, and now I can use it as a storage solution. FreeNAS, this isn't quite such an option because it's more static. It's more of a traditional RAID configuration. The Drobo has RAID-like features without the RAID. So it lets you do more things than a conventional RAID does, like the mismatched drive sizes. That's kind of a key thing for me because I want something that grows with me as I grow. In usage. I mean, you get what I mean. The other really nice thing about the Drobo is the fact that it's kind of a set it and forget it device. With the FreeNAS, you have to come in and you have to spend maybe, I don't know, let's say 6 hours setting it up just perfectly to get things just the way you want them. You have to spend a lot of time installing it, configuring it, setting up the services. Whereas with the Drobo, it's kind of a plug and play deal. If you have the Drobo share, you plug it into your network, you're good to go. If at any point I want to take this thing off the Drobo share, I could plug it directly into my computer via USB, and then it would just show up as a USB volume. It works under Windows, Mac, and Linux. The file systems on there are ext, NTFS, whatever you want. Well, actually, I think the Drobo has its own internal file system, but it appears as whichever file system you want it to look like. And that's really nice, whereas with the FreeNAS box, it's always a network-attached storage. 99.9% of the time, that's not a big deal. Only accessible via the network, I don't really care. I don't really see the issue with that. But in that one tiny possible chance where the S hits the F and I have to get to my data, network card blows out, something like that. The idea that I can take this Drobo and plug it directly into my machine via USB and still get to the files, that's kind of a huge deal for me because I'm so paranoid about data loss, because I've experienced data loss and it's traumatized me for life, basically. I'm not exactly exaggerating there either. So the Drobo has that kind of flexibility. Now with FreeNAS box, you could in theory just crack open the machine and pull out the drive. Depending on what file system, it's probably in UFS, so you'd have to have something that can read UFS, and then you could get the data off that way. Not as simple, but still doable. I think when it comes down to it, the FreeNAS box has pretty much everything you're going to need on the Drobo, except for the fact that Drobo apps are insanely simple, and the Drobo itself is insanely simple. It comes down to, and I don't mean for this to sound douchey, because it does kind of sound douchey when people say this, but it kind of comes down to how much is your time worth? And I hate saying that because your time is free, right? But in my situation, I essentially have 2 full-time jobs. I produce these videos and maintain a community, and I have a day job that is more than a full-time job. So every hour that I have to kind of ration. I have to really make a conscious decision what I'm going to spend my time doing. When I look at it that way, the cost of the Drobo isn't so expensive in the sense that I make the one-time purchase, and this Drobo is going to last me for up to 16 terabytes. That's a really long time. So yeah, okay, I make a purchase once, but then I can keep feeding this thing and it keeps expanding with me. That's really nice. Now, the FreeNAS obviously is also kind of a slam dunk, as long as you have the hardware, which in my case I had this Dell here. But I mean, you just look at the presentation of it. The Dell has to have a keyboard and a monitor so I can monitor it. It has to have this whole machine. First, it's like this small little tiny Drobo box. So, you know, there is that whole aspect of it, but that's not a huge deal. I think for the most part, I can't really think of a situation where a FreeNAS box wouldn't do a technical user for everything that they need. In my case, time is kind of critical. Expandability is huge because I'm constantly increasing my storage. I mean, it's getting to the point where I could potentially be looking at every 2 months needing to buy another terabyte drive. Or 1.5 terabyte drive, I mean. That's kind of a big deal. The other thing is with this Drobo share is it actually has 2 USB ports, so I can plug in another Drobo and then I can go up from there. That's probably not anything I'm going to do anytime soon, but that's also very nice to have. But some downsides to the Drobo. Again, I have the USB 2.0 version. I do not have the FireWire 800 version. FireWire 800 version is reportedly a lot faster. But some downsides. It's slow. I get around 10 to 11 megabits upload and download to the Drobo. I'm on a gigabit network with a really fast HP switch. The same speeds I got to the Windows Home server when it was cooperating with me could be up in the 40 megabits for the same files. Writing to the FreeNAS, 40, 50 megabits. Writing to the Drobo, 10, 11 megabits. Some of that overhead is because the Drobo itself is not a super fast machine, but it's also mirroring all of my data, writing the parity information, and keeping it redundant. So it's an overhead cost of having really secure, redundant data. That's something I might be willing to live with, especially since I don't need to have crazy fast access because I work off my local drive and then I upload to the Drobo to save it there. So I guess it's not such a big deal for me. But if you're working off it constantly all day long, you'd have to decide if 11 megabits a second is enough. It's enough to stream MP3s. I mean, it's way more than enough to do document files and edit images. So it's only going to probably be in things like video editing and things like that where it's not going to be fast enough. Or streaming HD video over your house. One of the Drobo apps available is a streaming program that lets you stream to your Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. You load it onto the Drobo, or actually in this case the Drobo Share, and now the devices around the house can stream the media directly off the Drobo. It's kind of nice. Alright, so it's kind of a wash. Depending on your time, you might want to look at the Drobo. But if you're technically inclined and you feel comfortable getting your hands dirty-ish, not even really, it's pretty simple. You could set up a FreeNAS box as long as you already have the hardware. If you're going to spend $400 or $500 building a machine to run FreeNAS, then you really ought to question if you ought to just go with the Drobo. But what about the Apple Time Capsule? So the Time Capsule, is it a competitor in this space? I'm not so sure that it is. The 1 terabyte model is $500. So there's your Drobo right there. The 500 gigabyte model is $300, I believe. That's still a little overpriced. Now, it is also an 802.11n wireless router, and from the reviews I read, it does actually seem to have exceptional signal strength. But we're talking more about a home networking storage solution. If you need to archive a few files or share a few files over the network, the Time Capsule has the ability to act as a NAS and to also back up the Macintoshes on your network. So it could be useful in a 1 or 2 computer network where you want simple file storage and you want centralized backup. There is a Drobo app to make a Drobo Time Machine accessible, so that way Time Machine sees there's a volume that is legitimate to back up to. I don't know if there's anything to do that with FreeNAS yet, but that's something to consider for Mac users. So moving forward, I do not really recommend Time Capsule for this type of use. I think the Time Capsule is probably better as a really expensive router with some hard drive functionality. So to wrap up this kind of battle royale between FreeNAS and the Drobo, for me, I'm giving the win to the Drobo. But that doesn't necessarily that definitely doesn't necessarily mean that's the win for you. The FreeNAS might be a lot better product for you. There's also other open source network storage software out there. I just happen to have really heard a lot of good things about FreeNAS and want to check it out specifically. But there's other stuff out there. I think, though, for people with requirements that are sort of time restricted and want I mean, it's so simple to use the Drobo that I would feel comfortable if I was on the road and a drive failed that I could tell my wife over the phone to just pop out a drive and slide in a new one. I'm also sure I could do that with FreeNAS. That might not be a requirement for everybody, so that's kind of where I would draw the line. I think Drobo is a very compelling product, though. I'd like to remind everybody that this episode of An In-Depth Look is sponsored by GoDaddy, and we really appreciate it when everyone out there uses the promo code LINUX, that's L-I-N-U-X. When you check out at GoDaddy.com, it saves you 20%, but it also helps us keep these shows coming to you because GoDaddy pays our bills, and everybody likes to get their bills paid. You can also, if you'd like to argue with me and tell me why I'm wrong about this review, hit me up on Twitter, twitter.com/ChrisLAS, and there's also the forum. We have lots of active discussions going on there where, you know, sometimes we get in heated debates, but everybody is always friendly. And you can find that over at jupiterbroadcasting.com/forum, where you'll also find all the different types of feeds where you can get these shows in audio form or in iPod video form or an OGG video form and all those kinds of things over there at jupiterbroadcasting.com. So it's kind of worth the trip. All right, everyone, I think that wraps up this episode of An In-Depth Look. Thanks so much for watching, and keep it geeky. GoDaddy.com is at it again, creating 2 new Super Bowl ads, but this year, they're letting you help decide which one will air on game day. Stay tuned for 2 clips, then, after you check them out, head over to GoDaddy.com and vote for the commercial you want to see during the big game. Better hurry, because the Super Bowl airs soon.
Insert Ms. Calmeros.
I never
never enhanced, period.
Miss Lemons? Enhanced?
My accuser misremembered.
Miss Patrick?
Yes, I've enhanced.
Miss Patrick?
It's true. I've enhanced my image with a domain name and a website from GoDaddy.com.
Enhanced? I'll show you enhanced.
Dudes, check it.
Oh, your new domain name and website from GoDaddy.com?
Yep, and now that I'm online, it's like I can make anything happen.
Danica Patrick.
Suddenly I have the urge to take another shower.
This is awesome! Keep watching.
This is my 5th shower today.
Steamy.
Steamy? Let's add the German woman from the dean's office.
Miss Schmidt.